this has been identified as one of the new issues or non-traditional issues for cooperation in South Asia, in an area in which cooperation at the government level is almost non-existent, and there are a lot of time. Most of the time so far, we didn't allow this issue to be to enter agenda of the official cooperation. But nonetheless, ours is a region on the move, in the sense that we have a quarter of world's outgoing migration, labor migrants in the world. Nearly 25% of the all international labor migrants originate from our region. And nearly quarter of remittances generated from them comes to our region. So in that way, we are a beneficiary as well as country of a region of the source of labor migration. But we do have a very huge pool of internal movement because according to some statistics that I gather, about 14.3 million people are moving internally, and apart from the 3 million plus refugees that we have from across the region or within the region. So that makes labor migration or cross-border labor market issues very important for us in the region. And so far, our cooperation in this issue or discussion, even I remember from the previous SAEX, where I was also asked to make intervention on this issue, but we started discussing bringing in this issue here in SAEX, but they have not been able to convince the officials or the government sector to bring in this into the fray. There are certain issues that we need to, I think, discuss from my point of view. I would say there are some questions have been framed, and it is there in the concept note. I'm sure the panelists, we have a distinguished list of panelists who have gone through it. Apart from that, I have certain points in my mind. I think we should begin by asking about the complementarities in labor market between our countries. Are we just countries in the region, or our labor markets in the region? Are we competitors, or do we complement each other if there was freer labor mobility? That one question I think we should frame and identify. Second question is, there is a lot of irregular migration in our what is called nowadays, in the official terminology we do not call it illegal, but irregular migration, labor migration in our region. Is that because of the restrictive regulation, security regulation, or is that because if we allowed more liberal labor mobility, would that be less or would that be more? That is another point I think the panelists may like to address. Another point is the informal and gender dimension of labor issues, because I come from Nepal, and I'll ask one of the panelists to a little bit elaborate on this. Between Nepal and India, there is a free labor mobility, and there's a lot of informal labor migration and seasonality. And I come from, we have farm near the border with India, where people used to come from India for seasonal plantation season, seasonal migrants. That also brings us the question of agricultural labor, whether that can be, apart from that can be an issue of cooperation, apart from other issues where migration may not be labor migration may not be a big issue. For example, if you go to financial other services, IT and other areas where we don't require that much of labor mobility. And also between Nepal and China, for example, there is the local border area migration. Border area, we have an arrangement with China where the people, bordering districts, people in the bordering districts can go to each other's countries and work there, not just go for tourism. They work, they get work permits. Can we? I heard the word other day about micro cooperation, micro level cooperation. Can that be a model for other countries, between our countries? These are some of the things that have that come to my mind when we start. I will now introduce the panelists. We have Dr. Diksha Singh, who is program coordinator with the South Asia Watch for Economics, Environment and Environment Shorty. She has worked on labor issues quite extensively. And then we have, I'll go by the order that is prescribed here, Mr. Raga Chakrabarti, Senior Research Associate with the Jobs Network in India, and he has worked extensively on labor dimension, job dimension of labor issues, employment dimension. Dr. Saima Haq Bidisha, Professor at the Department of Economics, University of Dhaka, and also Research Director at Shanim, Bangladesh, has worked with government, and it's maybe you can elaborate us, and when your turn comes on the gender dimension of labor market. And then we have Dr. Saeed Kalim Imam, former Federal Secretary, Government of Pakistan. We heard you speak at the previous panel also, and you have a profound experience on these issues. Dr. Praveen Jha also have given intervention that you made in the previous panel. I'm sure you will have more to make here. Professor at the Center for Economics and Planning, School of Social Sciences, and Jawaharlal Nehru University in India. So with this brief introduction, I would like to request the panelists to make initially intervention for about 7 minutes each, and then then we'll open the floor. Then depending upon the time available for us, allotted to us before lunch, we can have another round for around 3 minutes each, if that works for all of you. So I'll begin requesting Dr. Diksha Singh. You may probably highlight the nature of labor relation between India and Nepal, because this is one of the most integrated markets, because we have open border and free movement of people, and how that can be can that be a model for the whole of the region, or does this bring more challenges than opportunities, or any other thing that you may wish to bring to the table?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone. Okay, just let me start by. Obviously, we all know that so when we talk about South Asian integration, a lot of times we just discussion is limited to trade, how least integrated this region is, and also trade in services and all that. But labor is one of the areas in which this region is it's really restrictive. So although there's a lot of South Asia is source of out-migration of immigrant laborers, but still this destination countries are the other countries. That is what the most of the policy level concern is related to the out-migration from the region, but however, still the intra-regional migration is also quite substantial, though it is not reflected in the numbers, and because there's a large number of undocumented migration happening. Though Nepal and India, we have free and open border, there's a large number of undocumented migration happening, and which is not reflected in numbers. For example, Nepal's official census says that there is about 700,000 Nepalis living in India, but other surveys, household surveys and other kind of labor surveys have, they estimate that number could be as high as 1.6 million, considering the large extent of seasonal migration that happens, like workers go to India to work for a couple of months when they don't have work at home. So similar thing happens from the Indian side as well. There are some industrial estimates say that there are as high as about 1 million Indian workers in Nepal. So a similar thing is happening between other countries also. Even Bangladesh, so India says that there are as many as 2 million Bangladeshis living in India, though I mean there's not any substantive evidence of that. Politicians say that. So it means there's a large demand for workers in both sides, but still these issues, this labor market movement between the countries in the region is not reflected in policy dialogues. For example, last SAEX declaration in 2000, last SAEX summit that happened, in that declaration of 2014, these countries have emphasized on the need of having a joint mechanism to ensure safety and well-being of migrant workers from South Asia to the countries outside the region. But they kind of fail to see the necessity of facilitating labor mobility within the region, though they knew that informally these things are happening. So it means there's demand and supply of those labor movement. So yeah, and Nepal and India obviously is an exception in this case because of our Friendship Treaty of 1951. There's free movement of citizens between the countries. Visa is not required, and Nepali people can work in India without any labor permit. So, but Nepal is bit, Nepal does not reciprocate this. Indian workers, they need to get permission from Labor Department, and this mostly applies to the white collar jobs, because there are lots of Indian workers working in, even in the organized sectors. So, organized sectors, because it appears that between Nepal and India, it's like the similar cultural and religious affinity, and there's language is also similar sounding, so communication is easy, and there's cost of migration is quite low, and there's, since migration has been happening for so many years, for almost centuries, that there's almost like a there's existing social networks of migrant between these countries, so that it becomes like an extension of their, like what happens within domestic migration, rural to urban migration. It's like the extension of that migration, but it just cross border. So even in Nepal, so lot of industries in the bordering areas, industries in the bordering areas of India, they hire Indian workers in mass through contractors, and those contractors are responsible to find the workers, hire them, and those contractors are the ones supervising those workers. It's like these industries informally outsource their labor management to these contractors, and in return they say that it's less hassle to directly engage with the workers. Instead, that's more productive to them and convenient also. So, and so yeah, so a lot of these, though they are in organized sector as well as, but a lot of these workers are working informally and in unorganized sector. So it is kind of, it reflects on their quality of work, how much their quality of living as well. So though between Nepal and India there is no any restriction on mobility, but still the nature of work they are engaged in, the informality, so it leaves them vulnerable to different forms of discriminations, and there's stories of unfair work burden and how less their wages and all that issues. And even in the cases of this industries saying that they prefer to hire Indian workers because it is easy, because they are easier to manage, this kind of like they are implicitly saying that they can get away with treating them less well than Nepali workers, because Nepali workers, they are protected by our labor laws, and they have to have. So it means the quality of how these workers are treated could be less par. So yeah, and obviously when we're talking, so and most of the policies that labor laws and all that, they only, even if it's migrant workers, they only protect the formal workers. So this leaves a large segment of informal workers vulnerable. So even if it shows that even if the cross-border movement is allowed freely, there are some still more needs to be done. The policies need to see. So yeah, so and also with regard to informal, this movement of labor, it's obvious, I think other panelists will explain it better, that there's security concern, how to reconcile security concern with the economics. So whether free flow of movement of workers is possible or not, I think that is something to ponder over. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Singh, for bringing in the perspectives of the challenges that are associated with free labor mobility that we have between Nepal and India. And we also, even though we have a freer regime, like you said, there are problems associated with informal migration and the wage differentials. Free mobility without visa and work permits are there, but then cross-border industry-wise differentials are there, perhaps wage differential and also demand and supply issues. And you left us with an important question whether we can move on to free labor mobility. That's at least we can envision that, and we can start discussing that. Of course, there is a long way to go there. Our next panelist is Dr. Mr. Raghav Chakrabarti, Senior Research Associate, Jobs Network in India. Since you work on Employment Jobs Network, I would like to just frame one little question. In terms of job market and skills and wage rates, are our labor markets homogeneous between our countries, or do they provide opportunities for heterogeneity and complementarity between one labor force skilled for something here and they may be skilled for something in Sri Lanka or in India? Does that kind of opportunity exist in our region, so that we can in the whole becoming restrictive and over-regulated sector, we can little bit open up for that opportunity? And you may wish to bring in whatever else you want to bring. I will leave it there. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My presentation today is going to focus on cross-border labor migration in India specifically. And through this presentation, I would like to sort of underscore some of the challenges that characterize labor markets in India, and specifically what implications it has for migrant workers specifically. And through this, I would also like to sort of list a few questions and ideas that I believe must be provide fodder for some more deliberation, discussion, and some more dialogue on this. As Mr. Chair also mentioned that the international conversation on facilitating cross-border labor flows is premised on this twin fact that the regions have uneven levels of economic progress, there are varying demographic structure, so there is an inherent sort of need to match labor supply with labor demand, and this means that on an average sort of countries with higher per capita GDP or higher dependency ratio would over a period of time absorb workers from poorer countries or those countries which have a much higher average age of sort of working age population. So this kind of labor flows from labor surplus regions to labor shortage regions is something that we find throughout the context, and specifically in the ASEAN region as well, which is which is a host to only 4% of the world's migrants, but in recent times it's become one of the few global regions where the intra-regional migration has become very strong. And the primary motivation for this is that there's a clear formation of Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand as a very clearly defined regional migration hub, and this is primarily due to the very stark difference in per capita GDP and average wages that exist between, say, Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, and as destination countries versus source countries like Cambodia, Indonesia, Philippines. So the ASEAN experience just tell us that there are ways by which cross-border labor flows happen, but they are largely restricted for a specific set of occupations such as doctors, nurses, architects, some of the more technical sort of oriented occupations. It is still not very clear for migrant workers who are in informal and informal kind of enterprise. So it's not very clear, although there exists some that the ASEAN group did sign a declaration on the protection and promotion of rights of migrant workers. This was called the Cebu Declaration of Migrant Workers. It is not, although it has in its provisions to guard the interests of migrant workers, it is, since it's non-binding, it does not provide for much for much utility to the actual interests of migrant workers. Coming to South Asian context, yes, there is a lot of similarity in terms of labor market characteristics. South Asian countries have a large working age population. There is a bulge in the 20 to 35 years age of working age population, and we are also characterized by lower levels of female labor force participation. This is particularly higher. This is particularly low in India. And when you have long porous borders, what you then have is undocumented flows of labor towards really low productivity informal occupations more than anything else. And this point I want to bring, and this is something that Professor Jha also had mentioned in the plenary. It is that in recent times, India and even Bangladesh have reported declining levels of growth elasticity of employment. For India, it's around 0.1, and for Bangladesh, I think it's around 0.35. And the 0.1 number, just to give an interpretation, what it means is that for every 10% of GDP growth that a country witnesses, there's only 1% employment growth. And for a country or for a region with a large number of working age population and which is also growing at a much higher rate, this poses really serious problems, and it holds serious implications for the labor market in the times to come. And as a result, we also see that there is a greater informalization of work, and particularly within this informality, we find more and more migrant workers. And I feel like I believe some of the labor market phenomena that we observe already are going to be heightened and are going to become more accentuated. For example, labor market segregation. We already find that even domestic migrant workers are very neatly segregated in India into certain specific occupations, and with Nepali migrants who generally find it easier to find jobs in India, but they are also employed more as restaurant and bar workers, watchmen, factory workers, house servants, etc. With respect to Bangladeshi migrants, it's slightly more precarious work, as we see that they're mostly employed as domestic workers or construction laborers, petty traders, primarily and still centrally in the informal workforce. And there is also an increased sort of likelihood of discrimination, labor market discrimination, because there is no fallback or no social protection for migrant workers. So they're going to be consistently be paid less by employers, and there's also going to be an increased likelihood of discrimination. Off late, this is something that we are observing in the southern part of India, where there is increasing competition for jobs, and there is this inherent conflict between natives and non-natives that is also emerging. So any debate on cross-border labor market flows must take into account some of these potential conflicts that are getting heightened in this phase of jobless growth that we are witnessing. And I would like to sort of conclude by saying that any effort to sort of understand cross-border labor flows must take into account the structure of the labor market in each of the country. And by structure, I mean what kind of mechanisms people have for social protection, what kind of sectors are sort of absorbing more labor, what kind of sectors are being appended due to sort of latest technological forces. And something that I wanted to sort of bring up was that migrant workers specifically, they work predominantly in informal sectors, and so this makes it very hard to ascertain and recognize their contribution to the GDP. When you have that, then maybe you can make a more forceful case of what it is to have cross-border labor flows or more dynamic labor flows across the region. But it is not very clear at the moment what value they are adding. So I think it would be useful to understand the nature and the magnitude of economic and social contributions of the migrant workforce in India and other countries as well. I think that would make for a very useful study on understanding the complementarities. Is a country likely to gain from cross-border flows, or is a country likely to lose? So I think this study would be very useful to conduct. And I also feel that in the wake of rapidly evolving technological forces and also climate change, it would be very important to take a look at the skill architecture. And by this I mean
do you mind concluding this round, and then we can come back?
Yeah. So the skill architecture would sort of mainly understand what the changing realm of jobs look like and where more labor demand is located. Yeah, I'll conclude here.
Thank you, Mr. Chakrabarty. You brought in very pertinent, important issues, including the differentials in surplus and shortage regions, and how specific sectors are attracted to migrant labor, and you also brought in the issue of challenges associated with informal migration, labor, informal sector, and lack of protection thereof. And you also brought the interesting dimension of how growth cannot simply translate into generation of employment or jobs, and may not contribute to economic benefits to the people. And also you brought in the issue of the relations between domestic and migrant workers, which is always an issue in most countries, but not so much in our region though. And then finally you brought in the issues of technology, how it is transforming, because if the technology is transforming, and then our skills may not be relevant, labor mobility may have to move into different zone. To follow up on these issues, and plus whatever you may wish to bring, Dr. Saida Haq Bidisha, who is the professor, Department of Economics, University of Dhaka, and research director with SANIM, Bangladesh. Specifically, I would like to ask you about the gender and informal dimension of labor migration, and the level of protection, the differential that exists in our countries and regions, and how we can suggest or come up with some recommendations so that that can be better taken care of. Plus, you may wish to bring your own perspective.
Thank you. First of all, thanks the organizers to invite me. From the discussion, already we have been able to understand the weaknesses and the strengths of the labor force that we have. So one point of view, we have a demographic profile which is in favor of ours, but at the same time that will also end, except Sri Lanka and Afghanistan, it will end by 2040. So that is around. So that's one point. The second point is like the previous panelist mentioned, that In many regions, in many countries, we are experiencing high growth. But are we experiencing high employment growth as well? So that's the question. And because the employment elasticity of growth is not that impressive like the growth rate that we have in many countries of this region. So that is, I think, one of the very crucial factor that is actually we need to ponder upon and we need to think about it. Third point is like also we have higher total factor productivity, we have as a region experience total factor, higher total factor productivity growth and higher overall growth as well, but and there has been a impressive structural transformation. But if you look at the employment profile, has that been translated into high industrialization in all of the countries in a symmetric manner? And what was the scenario of the service sector? Because there has been growth in service sector employment, industrial sector employment, but if you look at it, then often the service sector is small scale informal service sector, and when we are talking about industrialization, in many of the countries we see that there is industrialization is concentrated in one or two sectors, like for example in the context of Bangladesh is the RMG. So from that point of view, another crucial issue is the gender dimension, and when we are talking about the gender dimension, there is a gender norm that prevails. Above all, there prevails a gender norm in South Asian countries, and that is something that is from on the first side, that is obstructing women to enter the labor market, and in the second step, that is not even the entering the labor market, it's sort of preventing women to go to the upper scale in the employment ladder. So if we summarize everything, then what opportunities or how we can benefit from cross-border migration, and from that point of view, I think the first we need to see that there are homogeneities, as Mr. Chair has rightly pointed out, but is the homogeneity, that homogeneity is from one side that's a beneficial for us, but on another side that can be something challenging for us. So we need to understand the whole profile, and we need to see that which country has which skill demand. Because there is a mismatch, there can be mismatch in certain areas but may not be in some other areas. So that is one thing. So we need to understand the skill set of each countries, we need to understand the production process as well, because both of these things actually boils down to the issue of the skill mismatch or the potential or the opportunities that we may have for cross-border migration. And from that point of view, the second point comes is like we can look for the different models. What type of models are available? Like there are EU, there are ASEAN, there are like maybe not very similar, but NAFTA, that there are different regional cooperation. So from this regional cooperation, can we learn something, and can we take some points from this regional cooperation? For example, if you look at the regional cooperation, one issue is like we have been talking about this in the morning. I have also heard that about the visa issue. So in that case, what can we do about the visa issue of the for a shorter and specific visa movement and make it very smoother? Second point is like skill accreditation. That is extremely important, because across the universities, across the higher education institutes, whether there should be a harmony or a recognition of the skill, of the experiences, and there should be a proper authenticization as well. So that is another very important thing that we can learn from other countries' experiences. But one important and crucial thing is like when we are talking about this, we are mainly focusing on the better skill workers. But the issue is more complex when we are talking about the informal worker and those workers who are more vulnerable, for example, the woman. And in this context, the problem becomes that one is the security issue. Another is the issue of the poverty, because in many cases we see that when there is like informal, irregular or unsafe migration, Why it happens? One is the reason is the poverty is something that is pushes the person from a safe place to take some risk. The secondly is like when we are talking about the female labor migration, then the issue is there's a lack of knowledge, lack of information. So information asymmetry is another thing that we can deal with, if we can deal with that. Third point is like when we are talking about like illegal or informal or unsafe migration practices, there should be the prime focus should be on law. So the laws related to not only the single countries, different laws, amendments and different type of legislation for the countries, respective countries, bilateral legislations and multilateral or mutual legislation to safeguard the interest of the not only female but also the male workers who are often adopting for informal routes to go from one country to another. Another point is like when we are talking about this, we have to be clear about one thing is like often female are vulnerable to very unsafe and or harassment practices, and in this context often it becomes very difficult for them to return to their own country as well in many cases. In that case, like what will be the alternative or what opportunities or what scopes we can offer to them, that is I think extremely important, because on one aspect we need to stop or we need to make the migration, illegal or informal migration process safe for the woman, and the secondly is even if it occurs, we have to safeguard or we have to safeguard the interest of the woman, and in that case like different type of, well, I don't know whether we should call it say shelter home or different type of training facilities, different type of employment opportunities for them. So even if they cannot or their family does not like them to return to their home country to their home, they can build up their facilities and they can fulfill their aspirations. So that is another thing I think we need to think about as well. And finally, I think our main aim should be to focus on skill upgradation and skill accreditation, because the fact remains that when we are talking about cross-border migration, the fact remains that we are not considering, or the main challenge comes when you are talking about the low skilled people, and as long as you cannot upskill the people as and make a skill base which is compatible to different countries of this region, there should be unsafe migration, there should be risky migration, and that is the most challenging way to think. And in that case, I think the public private partnership in different countries, in the respective countries, and also some mutual cooperation to enhance the skill base of each country's workforce, that is important. And finally, another point, I think another risk, or I would say another challenge is like when we have a country which is high skill, relatively high skill and relatively affluent, then there is a tendency to just out migrate or export the worker from there. So I should not use the word export, but that is something that we need, that's a challenging thing than keep for the domestic labor market as well. How we can make it mutual, that is another challenge that we need to think about as well. I think I will stop here now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bidesha. Very, very pertinent and very interesting intervention. And you cooperated with the fact that the higher productivity may not just translate into higher employability, and service sector growth may not bring in as many, absorb as much labor force as it's supposed to be. And one of the takeaways from the two interventions from Mr. Chakrabarty and yours, I think, is we need to have more concrete studies in terms of to examine complementarities, to examine the levels of skills difference between different countries and different markets, so that we have a real in-depth understanding about this. Because and then in terms of sectors, like you mentioned, which sectors have more prospects for employability over. Also in terms of the it seems like from your intervention we are in the very early stages of the learning curve from other regions. So which sectors are how we can really synergize the like you mentioned, shortfalls and surpluses within our own region. And also when you brought about social protection or protection of the workforce, then that comes to my mind. For example, for outgoing migrants, most of our countries we have not signed UN Convention on the rights of migrant workers, and which means which applies mostly. But that means the protection available under that UN Convention for migrant workers we don't have translated into laws, and but we have to follow that is international law. Also, some of us, most of us have signed ILO conventions, which specify labor standards. In such situation, one thing that Nepal has done, I'm sure Bangladesh has done as well as Sri Lanka, in order to fill in the gap that exists between the international convention, ILO conventions and UN convention, we signed bilateral agreements with labor receiving countries. So that we can make sure the protection available to female workers or informal workers or those who go to the formal sector can have certain safeguards there. Can that be a model for at least, because some of our countries also most of us are also labor receiving countries ourselves. So labor agreement, bilateral level agreement, if you cannot do it on a regional level, can we do that kind of thing? That is one of the things that we can discuss. Now, and thank you for bringing in the issues of shelter homes and etc. So I think that gives us a better understanding of the gender dimension of the migrant workers. Now I will like to request Dr. Saeed Kalim Imam, who is a former Federal Secretary, Government of Pakistan. And something we didn't discuss so far, and I would like to flag to you, but you may wish to deal it in whatever you want to. We have over 3 million refugees in our region. And in Pakistan, Afghanistan is one corridor where there's migration, but mostly one way, and also refugees. And because we have about close to 1 million Rohingyas in Bangladesh, and our region has a history of refugees as well as labor migrants, informal and irregular migrants. So how do you think our countries should respond to such challenges, and in terms of what we can learn from others, or what you have done between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and then whatever you may wish to bring in?
So thank you very much, Mr. Madhu. It's a very interesting debate which is taking place. But let me go back and say and tell that migration is a process. It's not a problem, and all of us have migrated. Once we move on, settle down, we don't want others to come. At times we are looking for opportunities. At times we don't want people to come and have the benefits and amenities that we have. America is a land of immigrants. So all migrated over there. My parents migrated from UP, they went to Pakistan. They are settled down. But then we also see internal migration, where people are moving within the countries, and there are equal amount of challenges that they face like any other foreign immigrant is going to face. On a lighter note, I was carrying out a study, and I said, who are the most migrated persons within Pakistan, and I find the brides. 66% of the Pakistani women, once they get married, they move to new places. So they all migrate. There are few women who manage to bring the men also to their own cities, but very few. But almost 66 people we see that they move out. So, when we talk about the migration and we talk about labor, it's about an opportunity. So if you don't give them an opportunity, then they will force themselves in. The water has to flow, and then there will be a lot of associated challenges and problems which will come with that. So if you give them an opportunities, you will reduce all this forced migration to zero, like this same. And again, everybody wants to move ahead and to have a career in their life. I'm just building up my case. We also see the economic nationalism, which I mentioned in my previous talk also, which also becomes a challenge for the skilled, unskilled people as moving as in in the process of urbanization, or the foreigners who are actually coming in. You see, Mr. Madhu just mentioned a lot of people who are in Pakistan, who got displaced or who seek asylum, or because of the conflict situation they have to move out. And this may be happening to many other countries. But there are a lot of Pakistanis also who wants to move abroad. They all the time they are making that struggle. So we need to make this difference between there are a few thin lines. One, there's a regular migration or regular movements or people who want to move. So if we are able to facilitate that properly, I think we will solve half of the problem. But if we don't, then we refer back to the two phrases we often use in the context of migration, is human trafficking and human smuggling. So what's the difference between human trafficking and human smuggling? Human trafficking is an effort by an individual who wants to go abroad. He's deceived. He thinks he's going abroad in a genuine documents. He's paying to an agent, he's paying to certain firms, and he believes that he's going on the right documents, but actually he's being deceived in that way. But there's another term, human smuggling. In human smuggling, the traveler actually knows he's going on the fake documents. He's going to go through the ships. The incident we had at the Greek coast, he wants to go there, and he just wants to make a career because he sees his cousins and loved ones all who have gone there. So you see a person being deceived and person who wants to go on a fake documents, and he wants to make themselves in. As far as this Afghan refugees are concerned, we have these recent policies, and we want them to leave now. The general statement should have been focused as aliens are not allowed, illegal immigrants are not allowed. But again, you need to give them some sort of a framework, some sort of an understanding. They have some certain rights, which are associated with them. Mr. Madhu mentioned the agreements, and he also mentioned the conventions which have not been signed. So once we make these conventions and when we agree to say some bilateral, are we actually translating down to the tactical level? Are the capacity being built over there? I don't believe it is built in that way. I have seen in developing countries lovely policies are made, but right at the police station level or the tehsil level or right at the micro level, people won't even know that this policy exists, and they even don't have the resources and capacity actually to implement those policies which have now been made. And you see, we see Brexit. Brexit is an example that South Asian countries should weigh. That what were the pros and cons, and what are they thinking about. When we see that the Labour wants to move from a place to another place, he's actually looking for prosperity, maybe survival, maybe a better life, maybe a decent life. But over there, are there frameworks available? Is he going on the right way? And are the laws over there? Is he going to be questioned over there? So and then he sees some successful case role stories, and he wants to go. You can see this in the form of child labor. You can see the famous camel kids, if you have heard, the jockey boys. They used to be moving out from the Gwadar and these regions in once upon a time. It has almost stopped now, but the parents would willingly actually send the boy. The parent would actually look at what's happening in larger cities. The parents are not sending their children to school, because they can't afford one good meal, So they want that boy to work. They also want this boy to go to move outside of the city, maybe outside of the country also, to go and get what they would say a better opportunity. So if we move ahead, we need to understand that we need to have an efficient management, in the context, and we need to remove the economic disparities within our own region and to ensure they get enough space as they go over there. But then there's a small size of markets and there are security concerns, like Mr. Subhan was saying, just now. In police terminology, whenever there's a crime, we would place a picket, and we are looking for any criminal then. And the actual criminal can only be arrested through intelligence and data and through some information. In the same case, all these people migrating to other places needs to get a proper way, like visas or some sort of an agreement. Let them go if they want to go, and let them have a space. I would say I'm trying to be magnanimous, because we have refugees so many Afghans. I tell you, the percentage of criminality would be 0.1% maybe. There are enough local potentials available for criminality, I would say, than with the refugees. But the narrative is built. The narrative is built that they are all criminals, Everything is happening because of them. We are getting poor because of them. And as a result of which, you wouldn't give space to them. So my recommendation would be, and with the experience that I had, is let's have a better data sharing. Let's give them an opportunity. Let's have a visa. After all, they are going, How many are you able to stop? So why don't you actually bring them under some regulation? Like the refugees who are coming to Pakistan in many ways, many of them were not even being accounted, And many of us would say, at least account for how many people are here, put them in census, give them certain rights. Many of them want to do some decent business, have a better life. And we have all been migrating, We know this phenomenon of colonization. We know this phenomenon how people have been invading and getting over other countries. But then we see these people moving ahead. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for being just in time. Thank you, Dr. Imam, for bringing in very important issues. And one pertinent issue regarding legality and law applicability laws. All of our countries have our domestic labor laws. That is applicable to their citizens, our own citizens. But can we make that protection available to migrant labor as well? Because they belong to minimum wage rates, they belong to minimum working conditions or condition of leave and other situations. So that might be one way out, applying our respective labor laws with respect to migrant workers as well. I think that would be a good idea. And also you brought in issues of human trafficking, smuggling, child labor and trafficking. That dimension we haven't discussed too much. Security concern, etc. And criminality, because our region, we are lucky in the sense that we don't have racial conflicts or kind of xenophobia that you see between migrant workers and the receiving host communities in other countries. So we do not have to discuss those things. But we might wish to take benefit from the global regime for migration, the Global Compact, where safe, orderly migration, certain elements. This is sort of our expectation, but at least there are certain protections, certain norms are available there. And if we can apply that, if we cannot evolve our own regional cooperation on migration, at least we can apply the global compact on migration, which provides for certain protection for the things that we just discussed. Now, our last speaker, not the least, Dr. Praveen Jha, Professor, Center for Economic Studies and Planning, School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University in India. We were just discussing before the beginning of the session. Someone asked him whether free labor mobility would be possible in the region. And you pointed out, theoretically, free mobility will not be required if there was a really complete freedom of other or equilibrium in terms of movement of goods, services and capital. And as basics of economics would require that, just as goods, capital and services, the labor is factor of production, it would require free mobility as well. Because if we can allow goods, services and capital to move freely, why can't we allow labor to move freely, just as freely? So that may be a hypothetical question, but of course we have political and other issues there. But specifically, I wanted to ask you: are our labor regimes in our respective countries or regionally, are we over-regulated, or it is just security-wise, security restrictions, political security restrictions, rather than labor laws that is preventing really labor market integration in our countries, and plus whatever you wish to bring in. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and fellow panelists for your very pointed remarks. You know, 1985, Immanuel Wallerstein, very well-known sort of scholar, thinker, and so on, he was visiting India, and he was giving a talk. The title of the talk was, "Does India Exist?" Very well-known scholar, and I was a student in the audience, and yeah, completely taken aback. Essentially, what is it that he was putting his finger on? You cannot understand any part of the world without understanding the whole. What are the underlying dynamics and so on and so forth. Remember, this is what people call globalization. It was early days of globalization. It was not even, yeah, in any case, globalization is a bad word. It needs to be prefixed with neoliberal globalization. You can have socialist globalization. You can have all kinds of globalizations, right? So let me not get into too many details of that. So what is the import of Wallerstein's claim? Yeah? What is the larger context of labor, globally speaking, and how do we connect the region, the countries with that larger context? There are 4 or 5 things which are very, very powerful markers of the larger context in a global sense. Number one, there has been a relentless decline in labor absorption everywhere. No exception. A relentless decline in, or what was mentioned as employment elasticity of, we have done a lot of work on this using the secondary data, ILO and so on and so forth, right? So if you look at the long-term trend of last 40 years, 40 odd years or so, right. Number 2, share of wage in total value added everywhere in the world, everywhere, again without exception. Developed, developing. Mr. Obama had come to India and he announced that India is not emerging anymore. It has emerged. We are waiting for that emergence even now. But that's the kind of context which we need to keep in mind. Without exception, share of wages have come down everywhere. Number 3, in large number of countries, even real wages have come down. The most powerful economy in the world, namely United States of America, economically speaking, even today, and of course militarily, it is the most powerful. Yeah. Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel laureate, tells you, late 60s, 2010s, 12, 13, 14, etc. That is the period, very long period kind of observation that we are looking at. Real wages of median white Americans, forget about colored, forget about those who are more discriminated categories and so on. There was a stagnation in real wages, if not a marginal decline. Quality of working conditions, everywhere in the world. I spend a lot of time in Europe, I spend a lot of time in Africa. Yeah? And without exception, countries like Germany, for instance, you have what is known as, sort of after the heart kind of decision that you basically do multiple jobs and so on and so forth, right? Peace-rated workers got legalized, etc. So when way back late 90s, I had gone there, I'm a young academic and so on. There was one sort of secretary assigned between me and other colleague, 2 of us, right? Now for the entire department, there is one secretary who works only for 3.5 days of the week, right? Remaining period of the week she is working in other places, hospital, here, there, and so on. Multitasking, right? That's the kind of larger context that we have to. So both in terms of quality and quantity, labor has been under siege. There is no other word for it, right? And this is a gift of neoliberal globalization. There is no other deeper explanation for it. Of course, you have countries doing different kinds of things within that broad framework and so on. So, like varieties of capitalism, we have varieties of neoliberal globalizations. German neoliberal globalization is much better than South Asian neoliberal globalization. We have completely surrendered, they have not, right? To a large extent because of the power of labor. Labor plays a very, very important role in terms of what kind of policies can be pushed, what cannot be pushed, etc. So at the end of the day, it becomes a political question in terms of understanding, comprehending who's where, in terms of, sort of shaping the broader trajectory of labor. So this larger context of labor is the most important thing from which we have to start. Then coming specifically to the kind of questions and issues that we were talking about. In such a context, what will you expect, right? There will be Darwinian competition, social Darwinism of the worst kind. What complementarities can we envision and talk about, right? Labor everywhere is pitted against labor everywhere else, right? They're very decent human beings, but what do you do when it comes to your own survival? That was Darwin. The prey becomes the predator, right? Vis-a-vis the labor from other countries and so on and so forth. In their own context, they are praised for capital. So that is something which we have to. So possibilities of so-called complementarities are so limited, right? Look at a report. I had used that report some 4 or 5 years ago of IOM report, International Organization Migration. Yeah, 67% of all international refugees were Muslims and on account of war. Right? That is the Middle East, the way it's been messed up. Right? The Big Brother has sort of created havoc in that area with support of all those who were willing accomplices. Right? So 67%. I mean, it's a frightening number. That is war refugees, international migrants as war refugees. They are climate refugees, growing number of climate refugees, internally, externally. Some good work is being done on these things, a lot of documentation, what is happening because of the climate change and so on and so forth, right? So essentially when we look at, when we think of who are the international or even within a particular country, moving these days, a very large proportion of them are extremely unfortunate victims of circumstances, right? Nothing within their control, yeah, and they would, as Imam Sahib was saying, that the parents probably would give their left hand or right hand to make sure that sort of child runs away, goes somewhere, will possibly have 2 square meals a day. Right? So it is that kind of thing which we have to keep in mind and so on. So irregular migration, right? There is a huge amount nobody knows. This is what we call illegal migration, etc. Irregular stroke illegal. Yeah. Numbers. Do we know the numbers? Right? The numbers are very, very difficult to get hold of. It was talked about, yeah.
You wish to say
yes.
few remarks for the
next
round.
Right. Okay. Estimates of laborability, let me just give you one stat. Gujarat High Court asked government of Gujarat, what is your estimate of number of people from within India who have come to this was in the context of COVID and basically giving some whatever benefits or relief or whatever you want to call it, right? The government said 22.5 lakhs approximately. That's our estimate. Our estimate. How many were registered? About 7,000. You're talking of these international conventions. Who cares for those? India was a founding member of that, has not ratified many of these important things related to labor. Right? So it is basically kind of saying, "Hum to aapko thenga dikhate rahenge." How does it matter? Yeah. So, sort of what are the possibilities, etc., in terms of, there are lots of things. You have massive expansion of what is known as informal workers. Within the so-called organized sector, formal sector, country after country, you have the same kind of story, whether it's India and so on and so forth. Susan George, let me end with that.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Yeah. In How the Other Half Dies, asked a very powerful rhetorical question. Can you think of the poorest person than the poorest man? And her rhetorical answer is, yes, indeed, his wife. That's the gender question, right? How they get pushed into. So hopefully we will have some more time to talk of some of the steps that can be taken as the first steps in terms of cross-border within the region. So I'll come to that in my second round. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jha, for your intervention and also bringing in issues of politics and globalization and neoliberalism, etc., which we cannot escape the elephant in the room, because even if we do not discuss it, we are part of it, or we are, if not victims of it. Then also you at the end discussed the challenges associated with informal migration. But then this also brings us to the question of whether the labor restrictions in our region is a political issue, or the political differences among us is hampering free mobility of labor, or whether it is an economic matter. Because, for example, between the BIMSTEC countries, where there is less difference politically, we don't see much of labor mobility within BIMSTEC countries as well, because political difference may not be the sole reason restricting labor mobility. There are other factors, economic and regulatory factors. I think we need to discuss those things as well. Now, I would like to open the floor. Please identify yourself, and if you can identify any of the panelists specifically, I'll appreciate that. But keep your remarks into one, because in the interest of time, we are eating time for lunch. So, please.
It works? Okay.
Not the time.
Okay, right, works, thank you. Thank you. I think excellent presentations by the panelists. I just want to remind that in South Asia, there was an agreement on services liberalization, the SAEX, that was signed actually in 2010 and ratified by all member countries in 2012. So there is something on the table, and which has been ratified by all the member countries. In that agreement, though it is not very explicitly mentioned about the labor movement, especially if we take the WTO terminology of GATS terminology of Mode 1, Mode 2, Mode 3, Mode 4. But already, as you have rightly discussed, that the informal level, there is a Mode 4, the movement of natural persons is actually happening, and mostly the unskilled labor, what is happening. But also skilled labor. In Bangladesh, as we heard yesterday too, many Indian experts, skilled worker, even from Pakistan, even from Sri Lanka, they work, but they come mostly not on a work permit basis. Actually, there are some very, very difficult kind of arrangement. Mostly probably on different kinds of visa they come. So what I'm saying that probably this is something could be a very good starting point. Just to conclude on that, if you talk about this cross-border labor management, we need to emphasize on the cross-border regional value chain. So here I can see the potential of mode 1. You don't really need to move the labor from one country to another country. Even if you could, a regional value chain could have been established that could also employ labor in all the countries. Mode 2, consumption abroad, even that could also generate.
I'll appreciate if you can make it.
Yeah, just by final comment, I can see the real potential of mode 3, the commercial presence, the FDI. And given the fact that some of these countries, they're opening up several special economic zones, and for example, Indian FDI coming to Bangladesh, definitely I can see the skill transfer would also be happening there.
Thank you. Any other? Please, Mustafa.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think all the presentations were excellent. Sometime back, there was a news in an Indian newspaper that Bangladesh was the 5th largest source of remittances for India. And that created a lot of commotion in India and also in Bangladesh. So we looked into our Bangladesh Investment Development Authority figures, and they said that only 11,000 foreigners work in Bangladesh. About 5,000 from India, but that wouldn't give you, $4 billion of remittance from Bangladesh to India. So which means that we don't have the data. Couple of years back, there was a ILO report in 2020, and they said that Vidisha pointed out about the profile of the labor force. So they found out in their report that out of 63 countries, average wages of women in Bangladesh is higher than men. Okay, out of 63 countries. So I looked into the data and found out that there was no, because the data itself was faulty. And that's why this type of, and then I in fact wrote an article over that. My suggestion is, Salim has pointed out with regard to the WTO, and you know that Nepal has submitted a proposal with regard to GATS Mode 4, movement of natural persons. So how can trade be free if it is not fair? When you talk about free trade, you only think about goods, free movement of goods. Why not where we have comparative advantage? So as Professor Jha has mentioned, the globalization itself should be question. One suggestion is that, for example, you have mentioned that Nepal has bilateral agreement with some of the destination countries in the Middle East, for example. For example, in the Saudi labor law, home workers, who many of who go from our region, they are not covered under the labor law. So if we can have a South Asian, stance with regard to this type of, discriminatory laws, I think that we can also influence, some of the destination countries. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Raman. Any other intervention? Or female participants, if you want to, I want to encourage you. Hungry? Well, I think I must, in this note, I must thank the panel for satisfying the audience very well, so that we didn't receive too many questions. And I thank you for your intervention. But nonetheless, because 2 interventions were made, and I promised second round, so I'll give 2 minutes each, reverse round, 2 minutes each. Briefly,
Yes, sir. All right. No, I think both interventions were excellent, and we have to. That is, see, I kind of gave you a kind of framework, situational connect, and so on and so forth. But can we take some small steps in a direction which? So that is where I think what our both excellent colleagues said. In terms of their intervention are very well taken. Can we think of ways and means? So for instance, what could be sort of learnings, let's say, from not within the region alone, but other regions as well, yeah? Africa, Latin America, US, it has a certain kind of architecture, people keep applying and they keep waiting and so on, the different countries. Yeah, so they have certain numbers, etc. So that is something which could be discussed within that forum, within the countries concerned. That okay, what is the acceptable kind of thing in terms of, let's say, the quantity, the numbers that you're talking about. That this movement should certainly be tried. Yeah. This alarmist stance that if they come, I mean, everything will kind of, the kind of things which you hear in India about Rohingyas, or earlier in the Assam context in particular about Bangladeshis, horrible kind of demeaning and if not dehumanization of fellow human beings. I mean, there is no place for that. So I think we need to really have much deeper, sustained conversation on that. And for that, a few things. See, so for instance, all the malpractices that we were talking about, fixing a minimum floor in terms of work standards, wages, etc. That should be our, I mean, of course, there would be some or many attempts at violating those, but at least let's have a framework saying that okay, nobody can be paid below this. No, I mean, nobody can be denied, let's say, a degree of social protection and so on. So I think those would be the things, and there is quite a lot to learn from in terms of global experiences.
Thank you, Professor. Dr. Bidisha.
Thank you. First of all, excellent comments, and so no doubt about it. One point is, I think, recognition of skill. That is something very important. That is a place where we can start. Second point is like we need to think about basically for the low skill people, because when we have different discussion on when we are talking about even skill recognition, we forget about those who are in the later part of the ladder. And probably we can think about at least some pilot sectors or pilot areas where we can start for providing opportunities for the low skill worker. Thirdly is like for the woman whose safety is a crucial concern. So I think there should be not only individual country specific laws and amendments, but also there should be laws which is accepted throughout the region, because often when there is a trafficking, especially because there is which is not legal, so it is very difficult to put them within the system of framework of law, and it becomes very difficult to penalize the person who are behind the whole scheme. So there should be a unified law regulation across the board, so that any sort of illegal or informal activities which harms the rights of the worker, that is penalized. And final point is which Professor Jha was telling, that there should be a minimum of the minimum standard for those who are working abroad, like for those who are especially who are the low skilled workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bidisha. Dr. Imam.
Thank you very much. I teach it at 2 universities, and like Dr. Parveen was saying, I am amazed, and even when I go to some other developing country institute that I have visited, most of the students that I talk to, they all want to leave their country, and they all want to go abroad. And I know none of them can make it, but they all want to go. This is that despair which has come in, even the people who want to migrate should know what is the conditionalities which is existing in the other part of the world. They believe that there are rivers of milk over there, and honey and sugar, and everything is going to be fine. My children, one of them is living abroad. He had a very facilitated life when he was with me, living as a bureaucrat, but there he has to do everything, and he still wants to live there. That I don't understand. But I think it's all because of the narrative building. It's all because of the mindset, and sometimes it's all because of the distrust you have in the very system that you're living, that you feel probably there's a hope somewhere else and you want to leave, And I believe that we need to, yes, impart education and make people literate, but developing skills and vocational sort of trades, is must. When I retired, the best thing which came to my use is, like I say, I'm a former IG or former federal secretary, but actually what helped was I did my law, and actually what helped was my PhD. So if you don't have a skill, actually you can't move ahead. So all these people need to understand to have skills, and somehow we need to build this narrative in schools and in institutes that they understand, And again, to move ahead, I would, like I said earlier also, one of the Dr. Seema just mentioned, this labor mobility agreements and all, it's so important, and the data sharing and research is so important, and the border management is very important, I would say, and the refugee and asylum cooperation is very important. Even if someone has making a mistake, he has been deceived, especially the human traffickers that I'm talking about, a person who believes that he's going abroad on the right documents, and if he's arrested, we need to treat him differently. Like I always say, that people who take drugs, are victims. They are not criminals in that way. And likewise, people who commit suicide, or are trying to commit suicide, are patients basically. You need to understand. Just last a word. Again, referring to my friend from India, and there's a tendency, I've seen, it's connected with this, that they believe that the criminality is being brought by people who have come from the outside. And in universities, I see a lot of people taking drugs at time, ecstasy and even ice, And the worst part of the university administration is they want to expel them. They want to absolve themselves of their duties. Now, if someone is taking a drug in university, you don't expel him. You give him counseling and you give him therapy, so that he's mainstream back into the society. You just cannot ostracize him. Sorry.
Dr. Dikshit.
I think a lot of things has already been covered, but yeah, so I think Raghav also said that, and Dr. Vidisha also, that there needs to be a proper study of how skill sets match between the countries, migrants, and the industries that they are migrating to. So not only the industries, the more study should focus on how the production networks, that established production networks, depending on the products they are producing, that might benefit from the migrant workers from another countries. So this study will also ensure that there won't be some kind of native versus migrant conflict in the future. So because right now I think someone just mentioned that so far we haven't seen that migrant versus native conflict in case of Nepal and India. I think it is because the migrants that are migrating are just doing the works that the locals were not doing, so it may not be so in case in the future. So we need to have that study. We need to figure that out, like which sector should be for how to develop this migrant skill set as well as this productive capacity. And another important, I think, this has been properly well documented in a book published by Sanjay Kathuria. I think we all know that book of this recent investment pioneers in South Asia. That book, that work really properly documents that how migration is precursor for the investment cooperation in the region. I think that also needs to be so that's why migration is quite important. It's not just about like a short-term filling up of the jobs, job vacancies in the countries, but it could lead to more cooperation in the region in terms of investment as well. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I'll make it very quick.
Sure.
So Professor Jha also mentioned that there's a systematic decline in wages, and in some places real wages also. So my only submission is that yes, I mean, one option is to set a minimum wage or a floor that across the region, so that could be in one way that could sort of act as some kind of social protection. But given that the absence of a of another option, of a fallback option, or of a bargaining option, given that the absence of which is the universal driver of distress-led migration. Is it possible that we take a concerted effort to implement and to work towards improving the bargaining position of workers? I mean, one way of doing this is through public workfare program, and this is done in India through the Rural Employment Guarantee Act. Increasingly now in urban spaces, there's a greater call for urban employment guarantee as well, and this kind of acts as a bargaining option, as an instrument by which the worker can prevent themselves from getting affected by the precarity that the job market is anyway putting them into. So yeah, this one concerted effort on improving the bargaining position through public warfare.
Thank you. With that last intervention, on behalf of my capacity as the chair, I would make very short statement. I will not take make long summary. Thank you each of you panelists for making very wonderful presentation, very pertinent suggestions and discussion. We have a good audience and not too many questions, but you were a good audience, I suppose. I thank you, Professor Soban, to be being here, listening throughout the period. That encourages us. One of the takeaways, a few takeaways from this, I would think, is that one area which each of the participants, panelists mentioned, is the lack of data, because we don't know enough what is happening where. For example, in the case of informal gender or even migration data, there is big disparity in what we understand, what exists in reality. So we need to suggest that there should be a better information data regime for migration in our region. Second is we need more in-depth studies in terms of skill matching, in terms of sectors that may require labor mobility or which can generate multiplier effects for each of us. Also, I think if we can prove economically through our studies that the economic benefits from labor migration or labor mobility outweighs security and political consideration, that's what seems to be restricting labor mobility and labor market regime in our region. If we can prove by way of study that economic benefits outweigh political consideration, that would also be certainly a huge contribution from our side. Third most important point is, which does not take a lot of investment, or if we are talking about connectivity, infrastructure, then it needs investment, it needs law. In labor mobility is just soft issue. We can amend certain agreements, make certain agreements, and we can instantly get going. So this is an area which is easily doable through a small soft set of agreements. So I think there, for example, the mention was made about labor protection, floor protection, or minimum wage South Asia wide, or skill accreditation like you mentioned, which we can do easily without investing or without funding a lot of things. So those things we can recommend. And other issues regarding criminality, human trafficking, those bigger questions, security questions are there, we cannot ignore them. But I think overall we did discuss the most important issues regarding labor markets in our region, and I'm sure our friends, colleagues at the CPD have taken notes of and will make better summary than I can do now. With this note, I would like to first of all at the end conclude by extending my sincere thanks and gratitude to CPD for bringing me here and providing us this opportunity, and thank you every one of you for making this happen and bearing with us for this 1 hour, and let's proceed to lunch. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.